The morning mist clung to the edges of the Montana Valley like a delicate veil, softening the jagged outlines of the distant hills and casting the ranch in a light both fragile and sacred. The air smelled of dew-dampened hay and the faint, earthy perfume of the soil, a scent that seemed to stir something deep within him he hadn't felt in years. He moved along the worn path toward the barn, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground with each step, and for a fleeting moment, he considered turning back, leaving the strange mare to whatever fate had guided her here. But the memory of the note, jagged handwriting pleading for someone to save her, lingered like a quiet echo in his chest, pulling him forward, binding him to this fragile life in the empty stall. When he pushed open the barn door, the familiar scent of dust and straw greeted him, but it was tempered by something new, a warmth that felt alive, pulsing softly in the early light. The mare lifted her head as he entered, eyes dark and wary yet shimmering with a subtle curiosity, as though she, too, recognized a bond beginning to form. Her ribs were still faintly visible beneath the coarse coat, but she carried herself with fragile dignity, a quiet resilience that made him pause and breathe a little slower, more deliberately. He knelt, not daring to make a sound, his hands hovering uncertainly above the coarse mane, until she inched closer, nose brushing the palm of his hand, as if testing the waters of trust. The first act of care was always the hardest. He had grown accustomed to solitude, to silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of the barn or the distant cry of a raven. But now, with the mare's warm breath brushing against his fingers, he felt the stirrings of something he had long forgotten, connection. His heart thudded unevenly, both terrified and exhilarated, as though he were standing at the edge of a precipice and had just discovered that the fall could lead somewhere miraculous. For hours, he worked quietly, brushing out tangles, checking her hooves, offering the sweet warmth of water, each action deliberate, meditative. And all the while, he spoke in whispers, soft murmurs of reassurance that seemed absurd but somehow necessary. "It's all right. I'm here. We'll get through this together." Outside, the sun began its slow ascent, bathing the barn in a muted amber glow that highlighted the dust motes floating lazily in the beams of light. He paused, hand resting gently on the mare's flank, and allowed himself a brief, tremulous smile. There was no dramatic transformation yet. Trust is never instant, but the first crack had appeared in the armor he had built around himself. The mare shifted closer, pressing into his side with a tentative weight, her warmth seeping through his coat and into a part of him that had been hollow for far too long. He had no words for the ache that tightened in his chest, the quiet hum of hope mingled with fear. It was in these silent moments, these small gestures of mutual recognition, that the central conflict began to crystallize. He was not merely caring for a wounded horse. He was facing the wounds within himself, the isolation he had nurtured for years, the grief he had buried beneath routine and walls of wood and stone. Each careful touch, each shared moment of breath and warmth, was a confrontation with the very loneliness that had defined him. But life on a ranch offers no guarantees, and the mare, though patient, was unpredictable. One afternoon, a sudden flurry of wind rattled the barn doors, sending a cascade of straw into the air. She bolted briefly, eyes wide, muscles tensing in fear. He froze, heart hammering, until she came to a tentative stop, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. He crouched, arms outstretched but still, offering nothing but presence, and slowly, deliberately, she returned. The simple act of standing together in silence became a victory, a microcosm of trust slowly earned. Days passed in a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Morning light spilled into the barn like liquid gold. Afternoons were spent repairing fences and clearing overgrown paddocks, and evenings descended quietly, marked only by the soft snore of the mare and the distant hum of crickets. He began to notice subtle shift in himself, a lighter step, a lessened edge to his movements, a smile that lingered longer than before. And in the mare's eyes, he began to see reflections of something he had thought lost: joy, resilience, and the quiet promise of redemption. One evening, as the sun sank behind a ridge in a blaze of crimson and violet, he led the mare out to a small paddock he had cleared earlier. She paused at the threshold, muscles coiled, and for a moment he held his breath, waiting. Then, almost imperceptibly, she stepped forward, ears pricked, tail flicking in cautious anticipation. And then, in a moment that made his chest ache with strange, almost unbearable beauty, She broke into a careful trot, hooves clattering softly on the earth, mane catching the fading light. He watched, tears pricking his eyes, as the mare circled him slowly, deliberately, before stopping and pressing her muzzle against his shoulder in a gesture that was neither possession nor demand, but pure acknowledgement. The wind stirred, carried with the scent of wet earth and pine, and he felt a profound sense of alignment, as though the world had paused to witness the fragile miracle unfolding in that quiet Montana valley. He pressed his cheek to her mane, inhaling deeply, and allowed himself to feel the full weight of the bond forming, fragile, imperfect, and utterly transformative. But the miracle was not contained to the barn. Word had begun to spread, carried on whispered breaths and quiet nods between neighbors. Children began arriving after school, shyly at first, offering hesitant pats or scattered handfuls of oats. A retired veteran wandered over one evening, cane in hand, settling on the fence to watch quietly as the mare grazed. Each new presence added a layer to the quiet tapestry forming around the ranch, a collective healing taking shape in the softest, most human of ways. And the rancher, once isolated and closed off, found himself at the center of something larger than he had ever imagined. One stormy night, clouds dark and heavy with promise, the mare became agitated. Lightning streaked across the sky, thunder rolling over the hills, and she paced nervously, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. Heart hammering, he moved toward her, calling her name softly, extending a hand that trembled only slightly. She bolted, frightened by a sudden crack of thunder, and he ran after her, slipping on wet ground but refusing to yield. In that moment, adrenaline and fear mingled, creating a clarity that could only be described as revelation. He reached her just as she approached the edge of the fence line, hooves pounding the sodden earth. Arms outstretched, voice steady yet soft, he whispered, "It's okay. I'm here, trust me." And she stopped, inches away, shaking but surrendering to the presence that had never faltered, never judged, never turned away. Relief surged through him, a tidal wave of emotion, so profound it left him breathless. Kneeling, he wrapped his arms around her neck, feeling the taut muscles relax beneath his palms, feeling the trembling subside into a quiet trust that transcended words. In the aftermath, as rain fell gently over the paddock and the first hints of moonlight pierced the clouds, he stood alone with the mare, drenched, exhausted, and yet profoundly alive. He pressed his forehead to hers, feeling the slow, steady beat of her heart, and in that sacred silence, realized the full truth of the journey. This was never just about saving her. It was about awakening the fractured parts of himself, about recognizing that love and care, once given freely, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he had never imagined. And as he finally led her back into barn, shaking drops from his coat, he understood that the morning mist that had greeted him days ago was no longer a veiled isolation, but a soft, luminous curtain behind which hope had been quietly, irrevocably born. His chest swelled with the promise of what was yet to come, a silent vow that neither he nor the mare would ever walk alone again. The sun rose slowly, spilling gold across the valley, catching the edges of the barn roof and turning the dew into tiny, trembling lanterns. The rancher moved quietly among the stalls, brushing the mare's coat until it shone like polished chestnut, each stroke a silent ritual of care and devotion. This morning felt different, heavier with promise, yet lighter than any before. He realized the work they had begun was no longer theirs alone. The barn, once a lonely refuge, now pulsed with possibility. Children appeared at the gate, hesitant but eager, carrying buckets of apples and carrots. The mare lifted her head at their approach, nostrils flaring, then relaxed as they stepped closer. Each careful movement, each whispered encouragement from the rancher, became a lesson not only in trust but in patience, in the quiet courage it takes to reach out when the world is closed in. A boy brushed her mane and laughed softly when she nuzzled his shoulder. The sound echoed in the barn, filling spaces that had once held only silence. He watched, chest tightening with a mix of pride and vulnerability. The mare's presence had unlocked something in all of them, something that could not be measured, only felt. The boy, once withdrawn and sullen, now radiated attentive hope, a reflection of the fragile resilience mirrored in the horse. He noticed the rancher standing slightly apart, hands resting lightly on the fence, eyes glistening with quiet awe. Without realizing it, he had become the quiet epicenter of a small, unfolding miracle. Every day brought new challenges. One afternoon, an older woman, cane in hand, arrived at the gate. She had lost a son years before and carried grief in a way that made others flinch. Yet she lingered, offering soft words and gentle strokes, feeling something alive in the mare that mirrored her own need for healing. The rancher watched them together, a lump in his throat, realizing that the barn had become a sanctuary, not for him or even for the horse alone, but for anyone willing to open their heart. The mare, now named Hope, became the symbol of this shared journey. Her presence transformed the ordinary routines into rituals of connection. Feeding, grooming, quiet walks across the paddock, watching the sky shift from cobalt to apricot. Every hoot of an owl, every flutter of leaves in the wind, seemed to mark their progress, a subtle soundtrack to quiet miracles taking shape. The rancher found himself speaking less, listening more, understanding that healing was often a silent, patient endeavor. Then came the storm, the real test of trust. The sky darkened unexpectedly, clouds roiling like restless spirits. Thunder cracked and the wind lashed the barn doors. Hope panicked, bolting from one side of the paddock to the other, heart hammering. The rancher ran after her, hands outstretched, legs slipping in the mud. Fear coiled tight in his chest, but he refused to falter. Every step was an act of faith, a silent plea for connection. She skidded near the edge of the fence, eyes wide, hoofs churning the wet earth. He dropped to his knees, voice soft but firm. "It's okay. I'm here. Trust me." She froze, trembling, then slowly, miraculously, came to his side. He wrapped his arms around her neck, feeling her body relax into his embrace. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating them in stark, electric clarity. A tableau of courage, trust, and the raw power of presence. In that moment, he understood fully. The work they had begun was never about control or ownership. It was about creating a space where broken things could become whole again, where fear could be met with patience, and grief softened with the gentle insistence of love. And as the storm passed, leaving the air crisp and new, he felt the quiet pride of someone who had chosen not to walk away, who had embraced uncertainty and discovered the transformative power of unwavering care. The barn no longer felt like a building. It was a sanctuary, a living testament to the ripple effect of compassion. Children arrived with small gifts, veterans lingered in quiet conversation, and strangers found their way through the gate, each leaving a little lighter, a little more whole. The rancher stood at the center of it all, chest warm, eyes soft, and realized that his life, once defined by isolation and sorrow, had found purpose. And as Hope nuzzled his shoulder, eyes reflecting the last gold of sunset, he whispered to her, almost reverently, "We've built something that will outlast us, something that can heal even when we're gone." Years passed, though it felt like only a series of sunrises and sunsets. The Recovery Ranch had grown quietly, steadily, a network of hearts bound by hope and the gentle insistence of shared care. Children who had once walked with heads bowed now rode across the paddocks on gentle horses, laughter ringing through the crisp Montana air. Veterans who had carried silent burdens for decades found themselves lingering, telling stories once swallowed by grief. And through it all, hope remained, a steady presence, a living reminder of beginnings made in faith. The rancher moved among them, less as a solitary caretaker and more as a quiet conductor, orchestrating healing without fanfare. His hands were rough, scarred from years of labor, but gentle, precise, and patient. He brushed a young girl's hair as she sat atop a trembling horse, murmuring encouragements that seemed to embed themselves in her very bones. Every step, every touch, every quiet word was an echo of the lessons he and Hope had learned together. That trust takes time, and healing takes courage. One golden afternoon, a boy who had arrived months earlier, silent and withdrawn, finally spoke. His words were hesitant, small, like the first bud of spring breaking through frozen soil. "Thank you," he whispered, voice trembling, eyes bright. The rancher froze, heart swelling away that made his knees feel weak. Hope nuzzled the boy gently, as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. The rancher's chest tightened, a mixture of relief, pride, and deep, quiet joy washing over him. It was in these moments that the full scope of their work became clear. This was never about a single horse or a single rancher. It was about awakening something larger, a subtle but profound movement of care that extended far beyond fences and barns. The valley itself seemed to hum with it. The rustle of leaves, the distant mountains, the soft murmurs of children and animals living in harmony. Healing had become tangible, almost visible in the shift of light, the cadence of laughter, the steady rhythm of shared breaths. Evenings were the richest. The rancher and Hope would linger in the barn long after the sun had dipped below the horizon, brushing, whispering, sharing the quiet intimacy of mutual trust. There were no words large enough to encompass what had passed between them, only gestures, a nuzzle, a soft exhale, a hand resting lightly on a warm flank. Each one a testament to the slow, persistent alchemy of love. The greatest test came unexpectedly. A storm rolled in, fierce and sudden, threatening to undo the careful work of years. Trees bent in the wind, rain pelted the paddocks, and the children watched from the barn doorway, eyes wide. The rancher moved with calm authority, rounding up the animals, securing gates, his movements precise yet gentle. Hope stayed at his side, her presence a steadying force, her eyes reflecting the quiet courage she had inspired in everyone who had come through the gates. By the time the storm passed, the ranch lay drenched but intact, and the rancher allowed himself a long, shivering exhale. The children clung to him in shy, grateful embraces. Veterans nodded quietly, and for the first time in his life, he felt a completeness that had nothing to do with solitude or personal achievement. The barn, the animals, the lives intertwined with it, all were proof that small acts of care, performed consistently and without expectation, could reshape a world. Night fell, soft and clear, stars scattering across the sky like the delicate brushstrokes of an unseen painter. The rancher stood outside the barn, brushing a loose strand of mane from Hope's forehead. She nuzzled his chest, and in the gentle press of her muzzle against him, he felt the quiet magnitude of what had been accomplished. A life saved, a community healed, a soul restored, all from a single choice to stay when he could have walked away. He whispered into the night, not for anyone but the two of them. "We've done it. We've made this place more than just a ranch. We've made a home, a haven, a place where broken things could be made whole again." Hope shifted, ears flicking, eyes soft, and in that silent acknowledgement, he understood fully. Purpose is not found in solitude, but in the act of staying, of giving, of believing that love, however small, is enough to change everything. And as the camera of the mind lingers on that quiet tableau, man and horse, silhouetted against the wide expanse of Montana night, the story folds gently, leaving a sense of wholeness, of quiet triumph, and a hope that extends beyond the frame.